A multi-day severe weather outbreak is barreling toward the Midwest and Ohio Valley right now, and it's about to put tens of millions of people in the path of tornadoes, destructive winds, and flash flooding all at once. This isn't a single storm system passing through and clearing out by tomorrow morning. This is a stalled, self-repeating weather pattern that is going to keep firing off severe thunderstorms for the next several days straight, hitting many of the same communities more than once. And the threat doesn't stop there. While one part of the country braces for round after round of violent storms, another part of the nation is about to bake under a dangerous and expanding heat dome. And out over the Atlantic, the tropics are finally stirring to life after a long, unusually quiet stretch. 3 different weather stories, all unfolding at the same time, all worth watching closely. Let's get into it. Before we get into the day-by-day breakdown, it's worth understanding just how unusual this stretch really is. Severe weather season typically starts winding down as summer wears on, with the most volatile stretches usually concentrated in spring and early summer. A pattern like this, with multiple consecutive days of organized severe weather risk spanning the same broad region in the middle of August, is genuinely uncommon. That's part of why this forecast carries the tone it does. This isn't routine late summer instability. This is a setup that meteorologists don't see very often at this point in the calendar, and it's worth treating with the same seriousness you'd give a more typical spring severe weather outbreak. The fact that it's arriving in mid-August, well outside the window most people associate with organized severe weather risk, is part of what makes this stretch stand out and worth paying close attention to over the coming days. Today, Monday, the severe weather threat is already spread across a massive stretch of the country. And if you live east of the Rockies, there's a good chance you fall somewhere inside today's risk area. 2 separate slight risk zones are in play right now. One runs from central Illinois and Chicago back through Maryland, cutting straight across some of the most densely populated corridors in the eastern half of the country. The other sits across the northern plains, where a very different but equally dangerous setup is taking shape. Wrapped around both of those zones is an enormous marginal risk area that pulls in more than a dozen states, meaning almost everyone across this stretch of the country needs to be paying attention today. Even if you're not sitting inside one of the higher end risk zones, if you're anywhere in that broader marginal zone, here's what you're watching for. Damaging wind gusts are the headline threat today, and they could reach 70 to 75 miles per hour this afternoon and evening. That is strong enough to snap large tree limbs, bring down power lines, and cause real structural damage to roofs, fences, and outbuildings. Large hail is also on the table, especially in South Dakota and North Dakota, where the atmosphere is primed for some of the more intense, longer-lived supercells of the day. And running right through the middle of all of this is a corridor where a few tornadoes will be possible this afternoon and evening. The exact placement of that highest tornado risk is genuinely uncertain right now, which is often the most unsettling part of a setup like this. 2 areas stand out as having the potential for a slightly higher-end tornado threat, Ohio and western Pennsylvania, and separately eastern Illinois. If a strong tornado develops anywhere today, these 2 corridors are the most likely places to see it. Zoom in on the area near Lake Erie, and you'll find one of the more interesting and potentially dangerous setups of the day. Storms are expected to fire this afternoon, and some of them may actually initiate directly over the lake itself before tracking into northwest Pennsylvania. Damaging wind will be the primary concern here, but there's also an elevated tornado risk if any of these storms manage to stay discrete rather than quickly merging into one continuous line. The reason for the added concern is that significant tornado parameter values the metric meteorologists use to gauge the potential for strong, longer-track tornadoes are forecast to run in the range of 3 to 5 across parts of southeastern Ohio. That is a notable number. If a line of thunderstorms currently moving through the region continues to weaken as expected this morning, it could open the door for a more dangerous, higher-end tornado threat to develop later today as instability rebuilds behind it. By the early evening hours, somewhere around 5 to 6 p.m., storms in the same Ohio Valley region are expected to become well-trained. That means new storm cells keep forming upstream and tracking directly over the same locations again and again, rather than spreading out across a wider area. That kind of setup dramatically raises the flooding risk in eastern Ohio, completely independent of whatever ends up happening with the tornado and wind threat. 2 separate hazards stacked right on top of each other in the same communities on the same afternoon. At the same time, keep an eye on the Midwest, specifically the corridor running through Chicago, Milwaukee, and Lafayette. There's a conditional but potentially significant severe threat developing here too, and it's one worth watching closely as the afternoon progresses. Some model guidance shows a few supercells firing before sunset this evening, which is notable because a very similar setup played out just yesterday, except that round didn't actually develop until after dark. Strong wind shear is once again in place across this corridor, which raises the tornado threat specifically around the Chicago metro area, layered on top of an already ongoing damaging wind threat. The general expectation is that whatever forms here will likely grow upscale into a line of storms fairly quickly, which would tend to keep the tornado threat somewhat lower once that transition happens. But if a tornado or two does spin up before that line consolidates, they could be strong. If you live in or around Chicago or northern Indiana, tonight is a night to stay weather aware. Keep your phone charged and know how you'll get warnings if you're asleep when something develops. Meanwhile, back in Ohio and West Virginia, the story tonight is rainfall. And with storms continuing to train over the same locations, repeatedly moving from northwest to southeast, the flooding threat by tonight becomes significant. Some model guidance even shows renewed supercell activity redeveloping around Chicago after midnight, which would bring yet another round of tornado potential, damaging winds and flash flooding overnight. Oz on top of everything already unfolding earlier in the evening. Then, heading into Tuesday morning, another round of thunderstorms is expected to move across Columbus and Cincinnati. If you live anywhere in Ohio, the storms are going to feel almost nonstop through this entire stretch, with barely any real break between one round ending and the next one beginning. And that is not the end of it. Late Tuesday morning, another significant line of thunderstorms is expected to develop across Wisconsin and Illinois. This one brings a widespread, damaging wind threat, with gusts potentially ranging from 60 all the way up to 85 miles per hour in the strongest cells. As the afternoon progresses, this threat is expected to expand and become more widespread across the region, which also raises the chances of embedded tornadoes forming within the line itself. The next 48 hours across the Ohio Valley and Midwest are shaping up to be genuinely intense, with very little downtime between rounds. That same line of storms is forecast to push into Virginia by late Tuesday evening and continue through the overnight hours, carrying the threat into early Wednesday morning. And Wednesday brings yet another round layered on top of everything before it. Nearly the same corridor, stretching from Nebraska back through Charlotte, is expected to see another significant severe weather threat. Damaging winds are once again the main concern, but large hail and a couple of tornadoes remain possible as well. By this point in the week, if you live anywhere along this corridor, you're not looking at one bad afternoon. You're looking at a sustained multi-day stretch of severe weather that keeps returning to the same general areas. Think about what that actually means on the ground. It means saturated soil that can no longer absorb additional rainfall efficiently, which raises the flood risk with every subsequent round of storms, even if the rainfall totals themselves aren't record-breaking. It means emergency crews and utility workers who may still be repairing damage from one round of storms when the next round arrives. And it means residents who have to stay in a heightened state of weather awareness for the better part of a week, rather than getting a single clear warning window and then being able to relax. So why does this pattern keep repeating over almost the exact same regions, day after day, instead of moving through and clearing out? The answer is something meteorologists call a ring of fire setup. Right now, high pressure is building in over the southern plains and strengthening. Looking at the jet stream, there's a strong band of upper-level winds arcing across the Midwest, Ohio Valley, and Northeast, essentially wrapping around the northern edge of that high pressure system like the rim of a wheel. Storm systems get funneled along this jet stream track one after another, slingshotting across the same general corridor in a repeating cycle, almost like cars merging onto the same stretch of highway one after another, rather than spreading out across different routes. That's the core reason this pattern feels so relentless. It isn't that any single storm system is unusually powerful on its own. It's that the atmospheric setup is essentially recycling the same track day after day, so the same communities keep finding themselves back in the crosshairs before they've fully recovered from the previous round. That high pressure is also going to intensify the heat across the Great Plains even further as it strengthens, while at the same time continuing to fuel this storm train through at least Thursday. There's a real chance it ramps back up again this weekend across the Midwest, meaning the region could be looking at multiple separate rounds of severe weather stretching well into the middle of August. This kind of extended, repeating August severe weather pattern hasn't shown up much over the past 3 or 4 years. It genuinely stands out as one of the more active mid-August setups the region has seen in roughly 4 to 5 years. Current model guidance suggests this active stretch continues through Thursday and Friday, spanning the Midwest, Ohio Valley, and Central Plains, without much sign of the pattern breaking down. Late Friday into Saturday could bring another more significant severe weather day, this time centered over Minnesota, Iowa, and Wisconsin, with damaging winds, hail, and tornadoes all possible in that setup. Saturday's severe threat then appears to shift back toward the Great Lakes, Ohio Valley, and Central Plains, with damaging wind gusts as the primary concern, although tornadoes remain on the table there as well. By Sunday and Monday, any lingering severe threat looks like it would be confined mainly to the East Coast as the broader pattern finally begins to shift. Beyond that point, confidence naturally drops off the further out you go, but the next 7 days as a whole are shaping up to be persistently, unusually active. If you live anywhere across this broader corridor from the plains through the Midwest and into the Ohio Valley, the message here is simple. This is not a one-day threat you can check off and move past. Multiple rounds are coming over the following days. The specifics will shift somewhat day to day as timing and placement get refined. And staying weather aware through the entire stretch matters far more than fixating on any single forecast day in isolation. Make sure you have more than one way to receive warnings, whether that's a weather radio, a phone alert, or a trusted app, because a fast-moving nighttime storm can turn dangerous with very little advance notice, and you don't want to be relying on just one source when the power might already be flickering. While all of this unfolds across the middle of the country, the southern plains and southeast are dealing with an entirely different kind of threat, one that gets far less dramatic coverage but can be just as dangerous. That same high-pressure system driving the ring of fire pattern to the north is also expanding a significant heat dome across these southern regions. As high pressure strengthens and holds firmly in place, temperatures are expected to climb, noticeably day after day, adding a serious heat-related risk on top of everything already unfolding elsewhere in the country. If you're in the southern plains or southeast, this is a stretch to take heat seriously, even if it doesn't come with the same visual drama as a tornado warning scrolling across your screen. Stay hydrated throughout the day, limit prolonged outdoor exposure during peak afternoon hours when temperatures and humidity are both at their worst, and check in on anyone in your life who may be more vulnerable to extreme heat, including elderly neighbors, young children, and anyone working outdoors for extended stretches. It's also worth remembering that heat impacts don't announce themselves the way a tornado warning does. There's no siren, no red box on a map, no alert that pulls your attention the moment conditions turn dangerous. The risk builds quietly over hours and days, which is exactly why it tends to be underestimated even though it consistently ranks among the most dangerous weather hazards the country faces each year. If you're in the footprint of this expanding heat dome, treat sustained high temperatures with the same seriousness you'd give a more visually dramatic threat, because the outcome can be just as serious. And then there's the third piece of this pattern, playing out quietly over the Atlantic. For the first time in a while, the tropics are showing real signs of life again. There are currently 3 separate areas being monitored for potential development. The most notable, sites in the eastern Atlantic, currently carrying about a 60% chance of formation over the next 7 days, which is a meaningfully high number for this point in the season. A second area, located just east of the Lesser Antilles, has roughly a 10% chance of development, though it's expected to bring meaningful rainfall to the Lesser Antilles as the weekend approaches, regardless of whether it ever actually organizes into a named tropical system. A third area, positioned north of Bermuda, also carries about a 10% chance of formation over the next few days. Most of these systems are not expected to amount to much in the end, likely remaining weak, disorganized low-pressure areas that fizzle out on their own. The one clear exception is the system out in the eastern Atlantic with that 60% chance of formation. That one has a genuinely real chance of becoming a more legitimate tropical cyclone, possibly forming sometime around Thursday or Friday of this week. Even if it does manage to organize, it's going to be fighting significant wind shear as it approaches the Lesser Antilles, which should help keep rapid intensification unlikely through the upcoming weekend. Looking further out toward early next week, the model guidance is genuinely mixed and worth watching. Some models, including the European model, show this system passing relatively close to Bermuda as it tracks north. Other models, including the GFS, show it curving safely out to sea well before it ever gets close to the U.S. East Coast. Right now, the odds of any direct or major impact to the United States remain low, and that same lower risk assessment applies to the Lesser and Greater Antilles as well. Still, it's the middle of hurricane season, and that alone is reason enough to keep half an eye on this system until there's more confidence it's actually tracking safely out to sea. Even with elevated wind shear currently in place across a large portion of the Atlantic Basin right now, that does not mean stronger tropical systems, even hurricanes, are off the table later in the season once conditions evolve. This is exactly the kind of setup that's worth checking back in on over the coming days as model agreement gradually improves and the picture becomes clearer. It's also worth putting this tropical activity in context. For a good stretch of this hurricane season, the Atlantic has been relatively quiet, without the kind of consistent tropical wave activity that meteorologists typically watch closely this time of year. 3 separate areas of interest showing up at once, even if most of them don't ultimately develop into anything significant, is a sign that the broader pattern across the basin is starting to shift. Wind shear has been a limiting factor so far, essentially tearing apart storms before they can organize and strengthen. But wind shear patterns change throughout the season, and a quiet stretch can give way to a much more active one without a lot of advance warning. That's exactly why this is a good moment to start paying attention again, even if none of these 3 specific systems ends up being the headline story. Stepping back and looking at the full picture, this is a weather pattern with three major moving parts happening all at the same time. A multi-day severe weather and flash flood threat rolling repeatedly across the Midwest and Ohio Valley, an expanding and genuinely dangerous heat dome building across the southern plains and southeast. Are, in the first real signs of tropical development, finally showing up out in the Atlantic after a quiet stretch. Any single one of these on its own would already be worth a close watch this week. Together, layered on top of each other the way they are right now, they make for one of the more genuinely active mid-August weather stretches the country has seen in recent years. If you're in the path of the severe weather corridor over the next several days, particularly across Ohio, Illinois, Indiana, and the surrounding Ohio Valley and Midwest states, treat this as an extended threat window rather than a single event you can check off your list after today. Have a real plan for how you'll receive warnings if severe weather strikes overnight, know exactly where you'll go if a tornado warning is issued for your specific area, and don't let repeated rounds of storms over several days lead to complacency by the third or fourth round. It's easy to grow numb to warnings after the first few pass without major incident close to you, but that complacency is exactly when people get caught off guard. Take a few minutes today, before the next round arrives, to actually think through your plan rather than assuming you'll figure it out in the moment. Know which room in your home is the safest place to shelter if a tornado warning is issued for your area. Know how you'll get alerted if that warning comes in the middle of the night while you're asleep, since some of the more dangerous setups in this pattern are shaping up to arrive after dark. And if you have family members or neighbors who may not have a reliable way to receive warnings, take a moment to check in with them too, because a plan that only covers you isn't a complete plan when the people around you are counting on you as well. If you're under the expanding heat dome across the southern plains and southeast, take the heat seriously, even though it doesn't come with the same dramatic visuals as a tornado warning box on a map, because extreme heat remains one of the single most dangerous weather hazards there is, year after year. And if you're anywhere near the Atlantic Basin or the East Coast, this is a good moment to start paying closer attention to tropical updates again, even if this particular system doesn't end up being the main story by the time all is said and done. That covers the major weather stories developing across the country right now, and there's genuinely a lot happening at once. This is a pattern worth checking back in on regularly over the coming days because the specifics, the exact placement, the exact timing are going to keep shifting as this active stretch continues to play out across the Midwest, the South, and the Atlantic. If you're new here, consider subscribing so you don't miss the next update as this story develops further. And turn on notifications if you want to stay ahead of any warnings that develop in your area over the coming days and nights. Thanks for watching. Stay safe out there through this stretch. And we'll have the next full update as this pattern continues to evolve in the days ahead. Weather patterns like this one are a good reminder of just how much can be happening across the country at the same time, even when most of the national attention tends to gravitate toward whichever single story feels the most dramatic in the moment. Severe weather, extreme heat, and tropical development don't take turns. They can all be building at once in completely different parts of the country. And each one deserves its own attention rather than getting lost in the noise of the others. Whichever part of the country you're watching this from, take today's forecast seriously. Keep an eye on how things evolve over the coming days, and we'll be right back here with the next full breakdown as soon as there's more to report.